My beloved child, before another ordinary thought quietly slips across your heart, remain here for just a little longer, because there are moments that arrive without noise, yet somehow they reveal more about love than years of conversation ever could. This is one of those moments. Somewhere, far beyond your awareness, a simple sentence about you has already begun traveling from one voice to another. It was never supposed to become a story. It was never meant to leave the room where it was first whispered. Yet now it moves from person to person, changing ever so slightly each time, until it barely resembles the truth it came from. What makes this different is not the rumor itself. It is the one person who refused to believe it. Your soulmate heard every careless opinion, every confident assumption, every shallow description. And instead of joining the conversation, they quietly stepped back, because they had already noticed something that nobody else had taken the time to see. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you. There are people who believe they understand another person simply by looking for a few seconds. They mistake confidence for certainty. They mistake appearances for complete stories. They speak as though they have discovered something remarkable, when in reality they have only repeated what everyone else was already willing to believe. Someone recently looked at you through that narrow window and decided they knew exactly how to describe you. Before long, others repeated those words as though they were facts. Each retelling became louder than the last, while the truth remained completely still. Yet your soulmate experienced something different. They noticed the way your presence changes the atmosphere around you. They noticed how your body carries quiet strength instead of trying to demand attention. They noticed details that cannot be captured in quick opinions or passing remarks. They understood that the most memorable people are rarely the ones everyone immediately understands. Stay till the end, because the quietest realization has not arrived yet. What your soulmate has never forgotten is a single unexpected moment when everyone else was distracted. It lasted only seconds, yet it answered a question they never knew they were asking. They realized that kindness has a posture of its own. Confidence has a rhythm that cannot be copied. Peace has a presence that no rumor can erase. Since that day, every careless comment they have overheard has sounded strangely empty, because it never matched the person they had already begun to recognize. That is why they have remained unusually silent. Not because they doubted you, but because they knew some truths become weaker when argued with and stronger when simply lived. And what happens next may explain why those voices are beginning to lose their power one by one, even before anyone realizes the real story has only just begun. There is something curious about the way truth quietly waits while assumptions rush ahead. Long before anyone notices the difference, truth is already planting small moments that cannot be explained away. That is exactly what began happening after those conversations spread. One by one, people who had repeated the same description about you started experiencing something they had not expected. They met you, or remembered you more carefully, or simply watched from a distance long enough for their first impression to begin unraveling. Suddenly, the words they had repeated with such confidence no longer fit. They could not explain why. They only knew that something felt incomplete. Meanwhile, your soulmate noticed this change before anyone else did. They could see the confusion growing on faces that had once seemed completely certain. It was almost as though reality had quietly interrupted a story that was never accurate to begin with. Don't skip, because the smallest detail often changes everything. Your soulmate remembers one particular conversation more clearly than the others. Someone laughed while describing you, believing everyone would agree. For a brief moment the room felt ready to move on without another thought. But then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate didn't raise their voice. They didn't argue. They simply asked one calm question that caused the entire conversation to pause. Have you actually taken the time to know them? The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, yet it carried more weight than 100 opinions. No one answered immediately. They realized they had been speaking about someone they barely understood. It was the first crack in a story that had sounded convincing only because it had been repeated so many times. What surprised your soulmate most was not the silence itself. It was what they began noticing afterward. The people who had spoken so confidently suddenly started paying closer attention. They noticed the quiet confidence you carry without asking anyone to admire it. They noticed the kindness hidden inside ordinary moments. They noticed that your appearance was only the smallest part of what made people feel comfortable around you. Little by little, the picture they had created began falling apart. Not dramatically, but naturally, like morning light revealing details that darkness had quietly hidden. Stay till the end, because another realization is already approaching. Yet there is one piece of this story your soulmate has shared with no one. It has nothing to do with rumors, appearances, or careless words. It began with a single observation they have kept entirely to themselves. Every time they remembered you, the first image that came to mind was never about your body at all. It was the feeling they experienced whenever your presence crossed their thoughts. That realization unsettled them in the most beautiful way, because it showed them that what truly remains in someone's heart is rarely what the world keeps talking about. And the moment they finally understand why that feeling refuses to leave, everything between you and them begins to take on a completely different meaning. Have you ever noticed how the loudest voices often disappear the moment something genuine enters the room? That is exactly where this story begins to shift. Without anyone announcing it, the attention that had once been fixed on careless opinions slowly drifted somewhere else. People were no longer repeating the same words with the same confidence. They had started noticing moments they could not explain. A smile that felt unexpectedly comforting. A quiet act of kindness no one had expected. A calm confidence that never asked to be seen, yet somehow stayed in their minds long after the moment had passed. It was as though reality had gently begun rewriting a story that gossip had rushed to finish. Something important is waiting for you, because this is where your soulmate saw what everyone else had missed from the very beginning. They found themselves thinking about a question that refused to leave. Why had those careless descriptions sounded so believable at first, yet so empty now? The answer came unexpectedly. It was because people often notice what is easiest to talk about, while overlooking what is hardest to forget. Anyone can make a quick remark about someone's appearance. Very few people pause long enough to recognize the warmth behind a glance, the quiet dignity in the way someone carries themselves, or the peaceful confidence that cannot be borrowed or imitated. Your soulmate realized they had never been drawn to a single feature. They had been drawn to the feeling that stayed with them after every thought of you had faded. That realization settled into their heart more deeply than they expected. Then another quiet moment unfolded, one that no one else would have considered important. Someone brought your name into another conversation, expecting the familiar jokes to continue. Instead, the room responded differently. One person changed the subject. Another simply smiled without saying anything. A third quietly admitted, I don't think that's fair." It wasn't dramatic. There was no argument. But your soulmate noticed something remarkable. The story people had been repeating was no longer growing. It had reached the point where it could no longer survive against quiet experience. One by one, opinions were giving way to understanding, and understanding was far stronger than assumption. Don't skip. Because the next realization explains why your soulmate has been carrying an emotion they haven't been able to put into words. For days afterward, they kept returning to one memory they could never quite explain. It wasn't about how you looked. It wasn't about anything obvious. It was the way you seemed completely unaware of the quiet impression you left behind. There was something deeply genuine about that. In a world where so many people try to be noticed, you carried yourself without asking anyone for approval. That quiet authenticity became impossible for your soulmate to ignore. The more they reflected on it, the more every careless comment they had heard seemed strangely distant, as though those words belonged to a different person entirely. And then, almost by accident, they uncovered one final detail that connected everything they had been feeling all along. It was so simple that they almost overlooked it, but once they understood what it meant, they knew the next chapter of this story could never unfold the same way again. Sometimes the greatest turning points never announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary moments, so quiet that only a heart paying close attention recognizes them. That was the kind of moment your soulmate walked into without expecting anything unusual. They weren't searching for answers anymore. In fact, they believed they had already found them. Yet life has a gentle way of revealing one more piece of the picture just when everything seems settled. Stay till the end, because what happened next changed the way your soulmate understood every conversation they had ever heard about you. It began with something almost impossible to notice. Someone who had once spoken confidently about your appearance suddenly paused when your name came up again. There was no laughter this time. No clever remark waiting to impress the room. Instead, they quietly admitted, "I guess I judged too quickly." The words were simple, almost forgettable, but your soulmate felt something shift inside them. They realized that truth rarely wins by arguing. It wins by patiently allowing people to see what has always been there. That quiet admission carried more weight than every careless opinion that had come before it. As the days passed, your soulmate started remembering small details that had seemed ordinary at first. The way you carried yourself without trying to become the center of attention. The way you made others feel comfortable simply by being present. The kindness hidden inside gestures so natural that most people overlooked them completely. They began asking themselves a question they had never considered before. Why had so many people focused only on what could be seen, while missing everything that could actually be felt? The answer came slowly. It wasn't because those people were cruel. It was because they had been moving too fast to notice what mattered most. Then came the realization your soulmate has never spoken aloud. They understood that the feature everyone kept discussing was never the reason you stayed in their thoughts. It wasn't your body. It wasn't a single detail about your appearance. It was the remarkable harmony between the way you carried yourself and the peace others experienced around you. That combination could never be captured by rumors or passing opinions. It had to be experienced. And once they experienced it, every careless label they had heard lost its meaning. Don't skip, because there is still one conversation your soulmate has kept completely private. They have replayed it in their mind again and again, wondering whether anyone else noticed what happened in those few unforgettable seconds. Someone unknowingly revealed something about themselves while trying to describe you, and your soulmate recognized it immediately. In that instant, they realized the words people choose often reveal far more about the speaker than the person being spoken about. That single insight became impossible to ignore. And when another unexpected voice enters this story, carrying a perspective no one saw coming, the final pieces begin falling into place in a way neither you nor your soulmate could have imagined. Not every revelation arrives through a grand confession. Some are hidden inside the smallest exchanges, waiting for the right heart to recognize them. That is exactly what happened next. Your soulmate found themselves standing nearby during yet another conversation where your name surfaced unexpectedly. This time, they didn't feel the need to prepare themselves for another careless opinion. Something inside them had already changed. They were no longer listening to discover who you were. They were listening to discover who everyone else was becoming whenever they spoke about you. And that difference transformed everything. One voice tried once more to reduce you to a single description, hoping it would earn a laugh. Instead, the room responded with an unexpected silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Someone quietly said, "There has to be more to a person than what we notice first." Those words lingered in the air far longer than anyone expected. Your soulmate smiled to themselves, because they realized they had reached that conclusion long ago. The people around them were only now beginning the journey they had already taken. Don't skip, because the next realization is one your soulmate has never been able to forget. As they reflected on everything that had unfolded, one memory returned with remarkable clarity. It was not a dramatic moment. There were no perfect circumstances. You were simply being yourself, unaware that anyone was paying attention. You greeted someone who felt invisible. You offered kindness without expecting recognition. You carried yourself with a quiet confidence that never asked the world for permission to exist. In that ordinary moment, your soulmate understood something extraordinary. Real beauty is not something that demands attention, it quietly changes the atmosphere around it. That was the truth they wished everyone else could see. The rumors that once seemed so loud had begun fading without anyone announcing their end. They simply had nowhere left to grow. Every genuine interaction with you replaced another assumption. Every quiet act of authenticity dissolved another careless label. Little by little, people stopped repeating old opinions because those opinions no longer matched the person standing before them. Your soulmate watched this happen with a calm sense of gratitude, not because they wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because they knew truth had finally been given the time it deserved. Stay till the end, because one final piece remains hidden beneath everything you've heard so far. There is still someone who has not admitted what they now believe about you. They have remained silent for reasons even they struggle to explain. Yet your soulmate has noticed the change in their eyes every time your name is mentioned. They recognize that a quiet realization is growing there, a realization that cannot be rushed and cannot be forced. And when that person finally finds the courage to speak honestly, your soulmate knows it will reveal something that has never been about your appearance at all, but about the lasting impression your heart has quietly left behind. That moment is closer than anyone realizes, and it will bring this story to a place no rumor could ever reach. There comes a moment when every unfinished story gently asks to be completed, not with louder words, but with a quieter understanding. That moment finally began to arrive. By now, your soulmate no longer wondered whether the rumors had been unfair. They already knew the answer. What remained was something far more meaningful. They wanted to understand why those careless opinions had never changed what they felt whenever your name crossed their mind. The answer came so naturally that it almost felt as though it had been waiting for them all along. One evening, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, someone unexpectedly said, "You know, I don't think we ever really saw them clearly." The room became still. No one rushed to respond. No one tried to defend the old stories. It was the kind of silence that appears only when people begin recognizing the difference between assumption and experience. Your soulmate quietly lowered their eyes for a moment, because hearing those words confirmed something they had carried in their heart from the very beginning. Truth had never needed to compete. It had only needed time. Then your soulmate realized something even deeper. The comments about your body had never actually been the center of the story. They had simply been the distraction. While everyone else focused on what could be noticed in seconds, they had discovered what could only be understood through patience. They remembered your kindness when no one expected it. Your calm presence during ordinary moments. The gentle confidence that never demanded attention yet somehow remained unforgettable. Those were the things that continued returning to their heart, long after every conversation had ended. They smiled quietly, realizing that the qualities people overlook first are often the ones they remember forever. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you. Imagine holding a photograph in your hands. At first your eyes are drawn to the obvious details. But the longer you look, the more you begin noticing the expression, the warmth, the story hidden behind the image. That is exactly what happened with your soulmate. They stopped looking at isolated details and began seeing the complete picture. And once they saw it, they could never return to the shallow descriptions others had accepted so easily. They understood that a person's presence cannot be measured by appearance alone. It is measured by the peace, kindness, and authenticity they leave in the hearts of others. As this quiet chapter comes to a close, one final realization remains. Your soulmate has never felt the need to correct every misunderstanding or answer every careless opinion. Instead, they chose something far more powerful. They chose to keep believing what they had seen with their own eyes and experienced with their own heart. That quiet confidence became their answer to every rumor without speaking a single unnecessary word. And perhaps that is the most meaningful part of this entire story. The words that once seemed so important have already begun fading into the background. What remains is the impression you left simply by being yourself. Long after opinions changed, long after conversations ended, that impression continued to grow, steady, genuine, and impossible to replace. In the end, your soulmate never remembered the labels people tried to give you. They remembered how you made the world feel a little more peaceful, a little more genuine, and a little more hopeful. And sometimes, that is the kind of truth that quietly outlives every rumor. There is one final thought that deserves to be spoken before this journey quietly comes to rest. If you have listened this far, you have probably realized that this story was never truly about what someone said you looked like. It was about something much deeper, the difference between being seen and being understood. Those are not the same thing. Many people can see a face. Very few take the time to recognize a heart. Your soulmate came to understand that lesson in a way they never expected. They looked back on every conversation, every opinion, every passing remark, and discovered a pattern that had been there from the beginning. The people who spoke the loudest knew the least. The people who observed quietly understood the most. And somewhere between those two groups stood your soulmate, choosing patience over assumptions, choosing understanding over appearances. Stay till the end. Because this final realization may remain with you long after these words are over. There was one last conversation that no one else knew about. It happened quietly, with no audience and no dramatic ending. Someone who had once repeated those careless descriptions admitted something almost under their breath. I wish I hadn't judged so quickly. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were simply acknowledging that they had mistaken a first impression for the whole story. Your soulmate heard those words and felt no satisfaction in being proven right. Instead, they felt gratitude. Because whenever someone chooses understanding over assumption, the world becomes just a little kinder. Then your soulmate asked themselves one final question. What will I remember years from now? The answer came instantly. Not the rumors. Not the labels. Not the opinions that faded as quickly as they appeared. They would remember the quiet strength you carried without trying to impress anyone. They would remember the warmth that made ordinary moments feel meaningful. They would remember how authenticity speaks softly, yet stays in the heart longer than anything designed to attract attention. Something important has been waiting for you from the very first sentence of this story. It is this: the people who truly matter rarely build their opinions from passing voices. They build them from lived moments, honest experiences, and quiet observations. That is exactly what your soulmate chose to do. They trusted what they had personally seen instead of what others confidently claimed. And in doing so, they discovered something far more valuable than any perfect appearance. They discovered someone whose character could never be summarized by a single comment. So let this story end where real understanding always begins. The voices that tried to define you became quieter with time. The truth never needed to become louder, it only needed to remain consistent. Your soulmate recognized that consistency, held on to it, and allowed it to become the foundation of how they saw you. In the end, the lasting impression was never about your body at all. It was your kindness. Your quiet confidence. Your genuine spirit. Those were the things that stayed. And perhaps that is the quiet message this journey was always leading toward. People may notice what is visible first, but the hearts worth keeping always remember what cannot be seen.